All of this happened in the crypto market last week. The Philippine government has introduced a bill to build up a national Bitcoin reserve. Specifically, they will purchase 2,000 Bitcoin per year for the next 5 years. Metaplanet is buying more Bitcoin worth $110 million. With this, they have now acquired over 20,000 Bitcoins. MicroStrategy has struck again. Galaxy Digital, Multicoin, and Jump want to raise over $1 billion for the Solana treasury company. That's really huge, and of course it gives another boost to the altcoin sector. Chainlink is partnering with the Japanese bank SBI Group, which is worth over $200 billion.
Ethereum hit a record high. Bitcoin hit a record high as well. So I flipped out of my Bitcoin exposure, and now I'm in ETH.
Yo, you heard it. The really big players here are now selling their Bitcoins and investing that money into Ethereum. It couldn't be any clearer. By now, it's so obvious that the big players are partially selling their Bitcoins and investing in Ethereum instead. Why is that? Well, it makes sense if you think about it. 95% of the entire Bitcoin supply has already been bought up, and the majority of people don't own any Bitcoin. If you were to play the same game again now, it would be smarter to invest in Ethereum, because Ethereum is significantly cheaper. The charts make that perfectly clear. Especially since the last upward trend, we can clearly see that the small players are selling Ethereum, while the big players are still eagerly buying up Ethereum. It's more obvious than ever before. And you all know very well, retail investors have never been right. My target for Ethereum is still at least $9,000 in this cycle, but it could go significantly higher. And that's the difference. With Bitcoin, we probably won't see a 3x anymore. With Ethereum, we could still see a 3x from here. With Bitcoin, that would just be too much. I don't think Bitcoin will reach 300,000 this cycle. So 200,000 could be possible for Bitcoin, maybe a bit more, but 300,000 just isn't going to happen. With Ethereum, we simply have much more potential from here on out. On-chain data has been showing this the whole time as well. For example, here we have a Bitcoin OG whale, someone who has been holding Bitcoin for years, who just sold 4,000 Bitcoin and is buying Ethereum instead. But things like this already give us a glimpse into the future. I mean, it's not for nothing that this Ethereum reserve is being built up. If the big players keep following this plan, it's obvious what's going to happen. Money is slowly being shifted around, and the next big thing is Ethereum. They're doing exactly the same thing with Ethereum now as they did with Bitcoin. And that makes perfect sense, because for these other companies, Ethereum is much more lucrative, much more interesting. Why? Because they see Ethereum as an entire company. Other projects are being built on Ethereum. There are stablecoins on Ethereum. There are smart contracts on Ethereum, countless projects that also use the token, because every time you want to use a smart contract or make a transaction, you need ethers that are held in the network. Plus, Ethereum is a company that earns multi-million dollars just from fees. So Ethereum is really being viewed here as a real company, and that's the brilliance that other major investors, these institutional investors, see here. Because that's not possible with Bitcoin, but it is with Ethereum. And especially the stablecoin market is going to get really interesting, because today the World Liberty Finance token is being launched. I mean, it's supposed to launch at 2 o'clock German time, and even Binance is listing the project. Donald Trump's company. They now have their own stablecoin, and as you can see, the market capitalization is already $2.6 billion. The stablecoin is now also available on Solana, and basically you have to say that if Donald Trump launches a stablecoin with his company, it's already covered from a regulatory standpoint. But you have to understand why he's doing this. The US is now moving completely towards stablecoins because stablecoins are backed one-to-one by the dollar. If we have more money in stablecoins, the US has more leeway against inflation, more room to take on additional loans, and so on. So, economically speaking, it brings huge advantages to the US if this stablecoin market grows, and it's growing rapidly. And that's also the plan of the US government. They will push more stablecoins in the future. They will probably also process some government payments and so on via stablecoins in the future, simply to further promote this market. And I see huge potential there, especially for Ethereum, but of course also for Solana. And some people are currently underestimating this thing, because hardly anyone is talking about the USD1 stablecoin right now, even though it officially went live today, for example, on Solana. We're also seeing some more corporate earnings today. That could also be exciting, and especially up until September, it's going to be a really interesting time. The labor market needs to remain stable, otherwise things could get tricky with the interest rate cuts. Although, it has to be said, the rate cuts are slowly being priced in. Over 90 crypto ETFs are currently waiting for SEC approval. And I think that especially this approval for the altcoins could trigger the next upswing, particularly in the altcoin sector. I think this could really be the next big thing, that ETFs are actually created for altcoins as well. I believe this could get really interesting here. Apart from that, we've retested the 20 EMA on a weekly basis, broke out from there again, were briefly at $170,000 last night, but then saw another breakout. This is where things really get interesting. If we manage to break through here sustainably, it could be that we head straight for the 50 EMA. At least that's been the case quite often in the past. Once we've broken through, we head for it, and the 50 EMA is at $95,000. But as long as the 20 EMA holds up here, things are looking good so far. However, I tend to think that we might dip back in here again in the short term, in the area around $106,000, because there's simply a lot of liquidity there. From there, I'm expecting a bit of a bounce. That already kind of happened a bit last night. $107,000 was tested, now we're back at $109,000, so there was already a small bounce. But we can see that right here at $106,000, there's still about $1.6 billion that could be liquidated. And I could imagine that the market makers will take advantage of that. But especially up here on the way towards $111,000, there's so much money lying around. If we go all the way up to $112,000, there would be about $15 billion that could be liquidated along the way. That's why a short-term upward trend wouldn't be unlikely right now. You really have to take these two things into consideration at the moment. Right now we're in a price discovery phase anyway, so it's best to wait for the next moves because at the moment trading is just a bit too risky. Personally, I'm still waiting for some clarity and a few signals that getting back in might be worthwhile, because right now, patience is the most important thing when it comes to trading. I also find that very interesting. You can see in the overall crypto market that Bitcoin dominance is declining, while Ethereum and Solana dominance are gradually increasing. We're slowly getting to the point where altcoins are outperforming Bitcoin. And it's slowly but surely building up, which is a good sign for the entire altcoin sector, because you have to say, by comparison, the altcoin sector is still extremely undervalued. It'll get interesting if we see a more severe crash or a bigger correction in September, how the altcoins will behave then. Because overall, you have to say it's not unlikely that we'll see a crash in September, or at least a correction. I mean, just look at the S&P 500. Since the low in April, we've made 35% here on an ETF. A 35% increase, that's crazy. With the Nasdaq, we've even seen almost 50% gains in the last 5 months. That's really insane for such large ETFs. Gold has also gained 37% in the last few months since that crash in April. And that's really intense. Gold is currently back at an all-time high as well, but we can see that we're a bit overvalued in all these markets. That means, in general, a correction here of 10 or 15% could definitely happen with the Nasdaq, because, I mean, if we go up 50%, we can also drop 15%. That's simply part of the game. But fundamentally, you have to say that in the bigger picture, we have larger goals. On a broader scale, things could get even bigger, especially since global liquidity is steadily increasing. And now, if we do see an interest rate cut, we'll also see that the Fed's balance sheet is rising again, which will inject a lot more liquidity into the markets. So in the long term, of course, we're on an upward trend, but in the short term, we could see another correction because the markets are currently really overheating in some areas. But by that, I mainly mean the traditional markets, and we are correlated with them. But what I won't do is panic if Ethereum drops below $4,000 or if Bitcoin falls below $100,000. What will I do? I will specifically wait for us to work through certain zones here, and then I'll add more Ethereum, because the situation with Ethereum today is completely different from a year ago. Nowadays, in this area, we have so much institutional interest, which was just completely absent here before. During this free fall in Ethereum, we saw nothing from institutions. We saw that Ethereum was tanking, Ethereum's on-chain data and so on didn't really speak in its favor either, but now everything is building up again. ETFs are seeing inflows, and Ethereum state reserve is being built up and so on. That means the starting position is much better. And if we then see a correction, I'll still buy some more Ethereum here to grab another 2 or 3 times gains, because in terms of safety, it's still better to buy here than to miss out on everything. I mean, the path for Ethereum has been set in the past few weeks. And I actually tend to think that we'll see another small correction in September because the interest rate cuts could probably turn into a sell the news event and so on. Take that as a gift. Maybe it won't happen that way, but if it does, you can see it as a gift because the starting position today is much better. The risk-reward ratio is definitely safer now than it was down here back then. But for that, you won't get as many percentage gains anymore. Still, we have a good safety to risk ratio because overall, $9,000 and more for Ethereum in this cycle is the minimum I expect. Other than that, there's really not much more to say. I hope you enjoyed this little update video this week. As always, leave a like and a comment and see you next time, friends. Bye.